So, nonprofit cloud, and we are winding down toward the end, looking at testing and deployment strategies this week. And your co-hosts. And just want for housekeeping, one thing we want to be sure, and I should have added this here, but we won't be meeting next week because Kathy and I will both be at Trailhead DX or Trailblazer DX, whatever it's called now. So we will be out of pocket, but we will be back on March 14th. And I think we only have 2 classes after that. So it's March 14th and March 21st, and we'll wrap up. All right. Today, we want to focus on, we've learned so much already, right? But of course, there's still more. There always is with Salesforce. And your testing and deployment strategies are every bit as important as the configuration itself. And these strategies should actually be determined as part of that implementation before the first install is done. So in this segment, we are going to look at how sandboxes work and what's needed for testing, which you may have already learned a lot of this in your admin career, but we're just going to recap it. How to create data for testing purposes, and then how to complete any post-install customizations. So let's explore the strategy and the tools that are available for a successful deployment of Nonprofit Cloud. First off, we're going to look at sandboxes and templates. So a sandbox, as you know, is a Salesforce tool that is important in all phases of testing and building. We're going to review the essentials and some of the best practices around sandboxes, and then we'll look at specific ways that sandboxes and the templates that are available for Nonprofit Cloud can be used. Sandboxes don't alter, affect, or change your current production instance of Salesforce. So they're a great way to clone what is already in production and build, test, change, and train in that environment without endangering your actual ongoing work that's in production. Customizing a Salesforce instance should always be done in a sandbox. That's the written rule. Not that everyone follows it, and we are well aware, but the written rule is you should always use a sandbox to test anything. A sandbox actually creates a copy of your production environment and allows you to make changes, test functionality, train others, and a lot more without affecting the actual production instance itself. So you can access sandboxes by going to Setup, Environments, and Sandboxes. And you see 3 tabs here. The current sandboxes that you have, in this case, there aren't any. The sandbox templates, which we'll discuss in just a few minutes. And the Sandbox History tab shows you a log of your sandbox usage. It includes creation, refreshes, and who created the sandbox. If you remember, NPSP requires an enterprise level instance or higher of Salesforce. So Enterprise comes with 1 license for a partial sandbox. It also makes sandbox templates available, and you can see that tab here as well. Sandbox templates allow you to customize what is created in a new sandbox based on the objects you choose to copy into the sandbox. If you're using a partial copy sandbox, a template is required. Each object in the partial copy sandbox will be populated with sample data if available. So we're going to look here. Let's see if I can do this little bit of a demo. We'll hope without breaking everything. Log in. And show you sandboxes, right? So I did actually create one here. So this is just called All the Things, and it gives you an idea of what a new sandbox looks like, what can be done there. That's the template, right? Here is a sandbox that you can actually clone. So if you need someone else to work on this with you, but in a separate environment, you can actually clone it. You can log in from here to the sandbox, and then your sandbox history. In sandbox templates, when you're going to create a new template, there's a very helpful interface here in the template, you name it, but then once you start adding objects, it also will add the required objects that are associated with that object. So for example, account. It requires that order, entitlement, and contact be also included. So you may not need order or entitlement, but you'll need contacts, obviously, when you're doing any kind of testing. So, but you can see that it went ahead and selected the additional required objects that go with that object. You can pick and choose, but remember, relationships are important. So depending on what you're trying to test, if the functionality is all within one small specific area, you might be fine. But if you look at your schema, it's going to be laid out in a lot of different places. So just to be aware, I had not seen that interface. I'm not sure how recent it actually is. So each of these types of sandboxes also has specific attributes. So depending on what you're trying to accomplish, you need to understand what they are. The number of licenses available for sandboxes also vary depending on the type of sandbox and whether you have an enterprise level instance or a professional instance or an unlimited. So Salesforce instances also do not come with full sandbox licenses available, and those licenses have to be purchased. So if you have an incredibly complex application programming situation that you need to test and to deploy, you may want to invest in a full sandbox license. Although there are some limitations there too, one of them being that you can only refresh them every 29 days. So the use cases specifically for sandboxes in these templates, right? If you are creating new functionality and testing that new functionality, a sandbox is imperative. So if you've ever updated a workflow rule in Salesforce and suddenly every single donor in your entire instance got an email, you probably learned your lesson regarding creating or editing functionality in production in Salesforce. So, I mean, raise your hand if you've ever done anything like that. Even something as simple as a new upload from a third-party app that captures donor info can cause undesirable consequences. So that's the reason behind the Salesforce-wide caveat of testing everything in a sandbox and then deploying it to production. No matter how sideways the work may go in production, in your sandbox, your production instance, nor your production data is affected. Another advantage of a sandbox is that you, as the system administrator, can create the sandbox and then give access to the sandbox to an external partner, whether they're an app partner, an ISV partner, an SI partner, or even a developer to complete a new feature. You can provide as much or as little data as you desire for the sandbox user to see. In the interest of privacy, there are options we'll discuss in just a minute on creating completely anonymous test data. User acceptance testing is also done very well in a sandbox environment without any danger to the production instance itself. And the added bonus is the ability to create test data that's randomized and doesn't contain personally identifiable information. So another great use case for a sandbox is as a staging environment where you can test new functionality that's not produced by you or at your direction. Salesforce has 3 major releases per year with new functionality and new options. And depending on how your production instance is configured, new functionality may not operate as expected. With the help of release updates, you can see which release updates need action and how soon Salesforce will enforce the release, whether you've tested it or not. So if we go back to our demo organization here, and we put in release updates. And again, not sure if you use this on a regular basis, but it's incredibly helpful to see what needs action, what is due soon, and be able to test these in your sandboxes to see what sort of effect it's going to have on your instance. As a Salesforce administrator, you're probably already doing this, but it's helpful to know that it's there and a great use case for a sandbox. The third use case is to train new staff. And nonprofit organizations are notorious for staff turnover. New folks are coming in all the time and need to be trained on specific business processes for the organization. Sandboxes are the perfect way to train new staff. Creating a sandbox allows your new staff members to use Salesforce without creating bad data in the production instance, and then you have to clean it out. Staff members can learn all the functionality they'll be using in a hands-on learning situation. They can ask questions, request help, create dummy data, and learn the Salesforce system exactly as it will look when they're released to do work in production. And then, of course, sandboxes are where you launch outbound change sets, which is one way to get those updates and testing from your sandbox to your production instance. So remember that sandboxes also do not require multi-factor authentication for login. So that's incredibly helpful when you've got new folks or external folks working on a product or a feature for you or training. You don't have to set up the multi-factor authentication for them if they're working in that sandbox. So a quick and easy way to do that. So all the use cases we just discussed require data for testing. And test data doesn't sound like it should be difficult, right? But it can be. You want to be sure that you cover every worst case scenario and the best case scenarios and explore those, and anything that might befuddle the new functionality or release or user input is tested. From a trust and security perspective, you don't want to use personally identifiable or private information to do this. So how do we create custom test data? When I first started, I laboriously created an entire set of custom data to use in a demo instance. I carefully pulled out all the required fields as well as the nice to have fields specifically for our volunteer management product and created a spreadsheet. I actually got my daughter, who was a young teenager, early teens, to help me put together what was superhero information, right? And that's how we created the spreadsheet. And it took a while to do it, but it worked. And you'll see, and happy to share this data with you as well if you want to use it. But we use it in our demo organizations and our training data for Hands-on Connect. So if it looks familiar, that's why. However, there are better ways to do this. So one of the ways we just discussed, right? A full copy sandbox. And the data is automatically brought over as well as the metadata from your production instance. So in a full copy sandbox, you get every single bit of data that is available, migrated at that specific point in time, not migrated, but copied into the full sandbox, right? So it's truly a duplicate of your production instance. And one of the great things about that full copy sandbox is that it does support the performance testing, load testing, and staging. So there's a lot that you can do with the full copy sandbox that you can't do with any other sandbox. The challenge is, of course, that there's an expense involved. And the other challenge, the refresh interval at 29 days, really makes it only appropriate for the final testing and for staging. Also, the data is not anonymous. And Salesforce offers a product called Data Mask. Again, it's a paid product, but you can use it to, they say, obfuscate. Don't have an option to say that word very often, to modify the data and to ensure the privacy. So there's different levels of masking available for Data Mask, using random characters, replacing data, and deleting data. So something to consider anytime that you're using a sandbox from your own instance. A partial copy sandbox is great. You have one free in your instance. And the challenge, the good news and the bad news, right? The good news is that you get a sampling of the data. The bad news is that random records are copied. So if you've got an account record, it may not copy all the related contact records. It may copy a contact record and not copy the related account records. So you're not always ensured or assured to have everything that you need in the partial copy sandbox. But generally speaking, it works very well for a testing area, a training area, particularly if you load data into it. And of course, that's the reason that for the most part, unless you use a Developer Pro, developer sandboxes do not have very much memory space. They don't have any data whatsoever. The Developer Pro is a little bit better, but then it also does not have data automatically in it. So what if you've got to create test data, right? So if you're, for example, working specifically with data around contacts, households, and donations, Mockaroo is a third-party tool that has a sample Nonprofit Success Pack compatible schema to generate sample data. And it also works well with the Nonprofit Success Pack data import tool. So if you need to create some fake data for testing or for training that is the appropriate kind of data, but doesn't reveal any information about the data in your organization specifically, Mockaroo is a good option. The drawback is that the free version only allows you to create 1,000 records. Another option is Snowfakery. And this is an open source contribution by Paul Prescott, who is an engineer on the Salesforce.org team. I've worked with him, Kathy probably has too, at sprints if you've attended, especially not recently, I haven't seen him there, but probably the sprint before last or the sprint before that. And Snowfakery creates very complicated and unique data records for testing purposes. And you know how complex some of the information can get in Nonprofit Success Pack when you're using program management module or all the fundraising pieces. The fake data that's generated comes with the relationships between the records already built in, so you don't have to create multi-tab spreadsheets and perform a multi-step import process. And it's an amazing tool to do really high level. If you need tens of thousands of records, you can use Snowfakery to produce it. The challenge is access is via the CLI, the command line interface. So if you're not familiar with that, that may take a little bit of a learning curve, but you can create those large volumes of data. Like I say, literally, if you're doing load testing or seeing how it works in another way, you can create those large volumes. All the data is fake, so there's no security concerns, right? It may be Jana Keith who lives at 1812 Penny Lane, and the phone number is 555-555-5555. So no concerns about security there at all. You can also have your developers, if you have developers, help you with Snowfakery. It's a very simple to use once you understand the command line interface. And there are recipes that the open source commons folks have created to help you create that data. And we have a great documentation example at the end, I think, in our resources to share with you if you want to explore that further. So if you're just starting work in Nonprofit Cloud, your first question may be, what is Cumulus CI? I don't know if anyone has ever used it. I have done some work with it. I have sat through a couple of trainings at the open source sprints, and it's an amazing tool set developed by Salesforce.org to collaborate on and share Salesforce-related projects. Cumulus CI stands for Cumulus Continuous Integration. It basically provides a recipe that can be shared to create a new Salesforce instance. Cumulus CI leverages GitHub to store the recipe for sharing. And it's a little bit of an advanced tool, but with some training, and there is homework in the form of a trailhead on Cumulus CI. So I would encourage you to take a look at this and see how helpful it might be for you. The use cases for Cumulus CI vary, but it's a great way to work with the open source commons tools we've already discussed, such as the outbound funds module. For outbound funds, the package has already been created using Cumulus CI. It has all the basic functionality for tracking most of the work that will be done, but there are customizations that need to be made so that outbound funds specifically delivers better information for our test case. And so you can spin up a what's called a scratch org with Cumulus CI, create that, and load it into an outbound change set that goes into your, not an outbound change set, I'm sorry, an actual package, if you will, an unmanaged package that will go into the organization using Cumulus CI. So you could do those customizations manually, but Cumulus CI has a lot of advantages. And I've listed probably the four most important ones here, right? So creating that new scratch org instance so that if you're doing a training class, everyone could spin up their own scratch org and it lasts for 7 days and it goes away and it doesn't touch anything. Track the history of changes to the components so that if you've got several folks working on updating and upgrading a particular package like outbound funds. You can share the metadata and the configuration with a third party and share the finished customizations with other organizations. So once you've created it, if you have a sister organization you want to share that with, you can. Cumulus CI may require the assistance of a developer to set up the initial instance, but once that instance is created, new scratch instances can be generated quickly and easily for the purpose of testing and for user acceptance testing. Talk to your developer team about using this strategy for testing, training, and deployment. Oops, got an extra slide in there. So testing and training strategies, we've talked about the tools that we can do that, the various methods for creating data for testing or training. There are several different ones. Touched a little bit on Cumulus CI, and I'll be interested to hear what you all think about that once you've completed that homework. And then keeping data secure using Snowfakery if you want to create fake data, or using DataMask in a partial or full sandbox. We've spent a lot of time over the past several weeks learning different aspects of data. Data and the relationships between data are critical. But in the next chapter, we're going to learn how to use the data to create reports, visualizations, and other tools that make the data actionable for everyone, not just the Salesforce users and administrators. And this is where the real kudos come, right? This is the entire goal, probably, of everything that we've done so far. All the data that's collected, all the information, all the automations come down to, can we show data in a way that the decision makers in our organization can use that data to make the best decisions to create more impact? Oops, sorry, not clicking well today. So that's the next chapter in our search. It won't be next Tuesday. Remember, it will be Tuesday, the 14th of March, and implementing analytics tools for impact. Kathy, you want to talk about homework and resources and office hours?
Yep. So, as Melissa said, there are a couple of trailheads. Sorry, I'm just looking at this going, why does it look wrong? Anyways, yeah, Cumulus CI, I've done some of the badges on it, and some of them I found really easy. Some were a little bit more challenging, so be warned. But if you figure it out, it's a good tool to get to know. There's also Trail Mix, and I'll just double check this one because I thought this was supposed to be a Trail Mix and it may have gotten confused. That also goes through the data generation And then, of course, there are the Mockaroo, the Snow Fakery, and some more Cumulus CI documentation there. And I also made a mistake on the thing. It's chapter 15 next week. I have a few things to fix. And then Thursday's office hours are at 1 p.m. And of course, as usual, we'll add the video replay and get this sent out to you. Hopefully, if we're lucky by the end of the day.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kathy.